echo? Okay, yep. Excellent. Welcome you all. I am Pastor Gabby Kudger-Wilkes, one half of the lead pastoring team at the Double Love Experience Church, and
Pastor Andrew, and we are just so elated to kick off our second church anniversary week. We call that Show Some Love Week, and what better way to kick off Show Some Love Week than having a justice lecture, because the intertwined connection of love and justice is pivotal, we believe, to doing appropriate honor and following the liberating, love-powered ministry of Jesus the Christ. So we're super excited to have y'all all in the room in Zoom and also via Facebook.
Yes. So we're going to open up with a word of prayer. Then we're going to introduce our guest of the hour. We don't want to eat up any of her time. We want to get right into it. And then following our fireside chat with her, we'll have some Q&A kicked off. And did y'all write in the chat? Let me see who we got in here. Who do we have? We got West Orange, Reverend Pam. Okay. We got Alexis from Pennsylvania. We got George from Queens. Let's go. Minister Felicia from Haladon, New Jersey. Of course, DLE's own Reverend Kelly repping the Bronx tonight. We know Shanae is she's our nomad. She's our nomadic member. Like, she's in different cities all the time. But she's hailing right now from, what you say, Low Country, Shanae? You're in Low Country right now? She's in South Carolina with family. Of course, Reverend Ayers, we're going to get to her, but she is repping Dallas, my hometown. Ken, of course, is repping Harlem. Pastor Andrew's repping Atlanta always, and then DLE in general, we're gonna always rep Brooklyn, because Brooklyn is always in the room. All right. So and I definitely would love to see who we have on Facebook. So y'all, let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer, and then we are gonna jump into our second annual Taking Back Our Stuff lecture. God, we just thank you so much. First of all, Lord, for preserving us. We thank you, Lord, for gathering us. We thank you for new faces, familiar faces. We thank you for the new relationships and bonds that will be built here today. And we thank you for the ways in which we will be stretched, we will be challenged, we will find community, we will be better than we were when we came, because we decided to stop by this way, by this justice lecture. Even though it is virtual, we know that you are right here in our midst. So God, we ask that you would speak through our guest preacher today as we have this conversation, as she shares of her wisdom and shares of her knowledge. And then as we hear the wisdom of the room, let this be something where each person who contributes makes the entire room better, a communal experience as we kick off year 2. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So we're going to jump right in. Pastor Andrew is going to introduce the one and only Reverend Danielle Ayers. And then Reverend, we're going to get right into this fireside chat. All right.
I feel so privileged and honored to be able to introduce the Reverend Danielle Ayers. When Pastor Gabby and I were serving at our former church, and I started a social justice ministry there, the foundational text was written by none other than the Reverend Danielle Ayers to serve this present age. It's a pivotal text assigned in seminaries and divinity schools across the country on justice work in Black churches. I think of Reverend Ayers as a incomparable blend of Ella Baker and Reverend Prathia Hall in terms of the strategist and theological work that she brings to the table. She comes holding degrees in marketing and economics from the University of Memphis and did her MDiv at Bright Divinity School down in Texas. Y'all, she's also the co-convener of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, which is doing transformative work, not only in the Americas, but also on the continent and globally. So we have a really distinguished subject matter expert across disciplines, y'all. And so without further ado, we're so excited to be in conversation with Reverend Danielle Ayers.
Yes. Welcome, Reverend Ayers.
Well, thank you so much. But let me first start by saying congratulations to you on your ordination. I had no idea that was taking place.
I'm Baptist now.
So I'm so excited about that, even though you were well into already doing the gospel ministry before you got the official ordination, right? We're always doing that church without sanctuary, right? That's who we are. And what we have done. So congratulations on that. I saw the pictures. That was absolutely beautiful and amazing. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you so, so much. Well, listen, we're going to get right into it. We have some questions for you and really just want to dive in. And so family, those of you gathered in the Zoom, please feel free. If there are things that catch your attention, drop it in the chat. If there are questions, we know that in Zoom, there's the thing happening on the main screen and the chat takes on its own life. So don't be shy. If something is funny, go ahead and throw a little LOL. You know, if something piques your interest, go ahead and drop that. And same thing with Facebook. We want this to be an experience where we are all having a shared understanding and a shared collective conversation by our metaphorical fire. So, Reverend Ayers, there's something that you said when we were having our pre-conversation about tonight that really stuck with me. You talked about this concept that for many, many years, churches were very proud of having justice ministries, and it was work that we did that needed to be done. And, you know, churches had social justice ministries. But you said that in this day and age, you are, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I get it wrong, but you said that you are more interested these days in a church that is just than solely churches that only have justice ministries that are a portion of what they do. And I just would love for you to speak to that as a framing conversation. We do root ourselves as a love and justice church, but what does that mean to you? What does a church that is just look like? And what are some of those distinctions? And just share with us how you think through those kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. And coming back to that, I'll start off by saying the way in which I will lay this out, it definitely is how I view this. I know it's only a way, and I'm sure there are other ways in which people would respond to this question. So I want to acknowledge the fact that I understand that the table is broad enough and wide enough to have more than one opinion. So when I think about just historically, right, in terms of the Black church, and I guess I'll say throughout this, you know, tonight, when I say Black church, I'm specifically talking about, when I say Black church, I'm talking about that Black church, as Welcher would say, that was born out of resistance. So I'm talking about the Black church who was part of liberating, right, enslaved Africans from bondage. So that when I say Black church, that's what I'm talking about, not churches with Black people in it. So I just want to be clear about.
Wait, because I love it. Can you say that again?
The distinction.
Because you gave us that distinction. You said not just church with Black people in it, but the church.
Yeah, so you know, you have the capital B, capital C Black church. Then we have churches with Black people in them, because as we know, sometimes many of the churches who may have Black members and a Black, you know, pastor, that pastors can be, you know, using a theology of what I would call the slave master that we have carried over well into the 21st century, that was really started by slave owners to have a theological defense system, right? To uphold then the whiteness that undergirded all the institutions that structured society in ways that devalue Black bodies, that dehumanize Black bodies. And that's still with us today. So I'm clear that you can have Black preachers preaching a white theology that is detrimental to the very well-being of Black people, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. So that's what I'm making that distinction up and against a Black church who understands that God cares about lives, as Martin Frederick would say, right, between Sundays. And so I'm just making that distinction. So throughout, when I say Black church, I'm specifically talking about those churches who followed that tradition, right, of the Black church that was born out of resistance, those who went down into the hush harvest to worship the God they knew, you know, away from the overseer and the slave owners' watchful eye. So that's why I want to make that distinction early on, because I'm more than sure I'll say that throughout, because I tend to.
I love that. They beat that into me. I shouldn't say beat that. That's not.
Yeah.
They made sure I knew that.
Right.
When I was going through divinity school, but really before I got there, I really had not thought about that. And when you put it in those distinctions, right? Because this lecture series, we call it Taking Back Our Stuff, right? Black Jesus, Black Stories, Black Lives. And so even taking back our churches that have Black folks in them, that's gonna get me excited. But please continue.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I love the way you all say take back our stuff, because it also invokes, right, this notion of that we're always engaged in a Sankofa moment. How do we go back and fetch either what was taken and snatched or what we ourselves allowed ourselves to let go of, right? So I think that's so important. And that's just me. I believe in, you know, sacred memory as a way of moving forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let me get into answering what I mean by this, and this has happened over time. This has evolved over time, where initially I was churches need a justice ministry. We need a justice ministry. And yes, I now see it more so. What does it mean to be a just church? And so when you think historically, right, the Black church has served as that anchor institution, the lifeline to community, served as a resource for counseling, economic and community development, political literacy, culture enrichment, spiritual formation, civic engagement, education, et cetera, right? Many of our schools were founded through Black churches, mutual aid societies, beneficial societies. However, I think this role is being significantly challenged in this day, right? And I think that's for a number of reasons. That can be the need to provide and consider new church leadership paradigms that really broaden the table, expand the table for more ideas, for more voices to be heard, and also to our, what I would say, lack of response to failed public policies, right, that are rooted in racism, capitalism, and materialism. Then you have the uncontrolled events, right, that we're typically trying to respond to or are not able to respond to by way of floods, tornadoes, and now you see, COVID, a public health crisis. And so I think that these things have and continue to jeopardize the sustainability of churches and our communities, right, of how we are, in my opinion, we are slipping from that and getting away from that. And just parenthetically, I think this, COVID is probably the opportune time for us to kind of adjust and radically reimagine what church ought to look like, right? This is probably the most major disruption we've had in centuries in terms of the church, right? So I think this is a prime opportunity to kind of recalibrate and kind of reconstitute what it means to be and do church. So when I say just church, and justice ministry, why it's important, that's really anchored in my understanding of Micah 6 and 8. When it says, what does the Lord require of thee? To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with thee. So for me to do justice, now since we're talking about the church, I see that as internal and external. I see that as doing justice first means, do we have a right relationship with one another inside the church, right? So do we think about the ways we have to rid ourselves of hierarchy, patriarchy in both men and women, sexism, hypermasculinity, exclusion, slow to change, lack of leadership, lack of accountability. And I think that are we just in how we deal with each other inside the church? Because you cannot go out, right, into these pulpits, into the public square, really calling that structural sin and practices where we're trying to confront structural evil, naming it and calling out people, right, who perpetuate this evil when we are perpetuating that inside the church. Mm-hmm. So I think you first have to have a just structure in your church before you go out and start talking about doing justice work. And so I think we have to do that because we're also, to do justice for me means, how do we have a right relationship to the external forces, people, and systems? Right, because we have to deal with them because it is part of how our society is structured. And so I think that in order to deal with these external threats, whether that's environmental racism, lack of access to affordable housing, the widening wealth gap, the lack of access and ability to identify professional services that we might need, and not transactional preaching and ministry, but transformative, right? That's a threat as well. The exclusion of certain folks, lack of understanding of your church, your community assets, power mapping, asset mapping. What do you have? Just our lack of advocacy, just allowing ourselves not to be in right relationship with systems, but allowing systems then to impose onto us what they do. And then we're talking, we talk about displacement, gentrification, hyper individualism. So if we're not right inside, it's hard to go outside and to confront all these matters. So I think when you do that first and everybody feels welcome, everybody feels affirmed, then you can have more people engaged in justice work. Because if you just have the pastor preaching it, a justice, and I'm speaking from experience now, and a justice pastor over here in a ministry, what can tend to happen is they'll see the pastor's preaching it, and that's just what they do over there. Yeah. Right. But when you think about what it means to be just, to be in right relationship, and then the other part of that, to walk humbly with thee, for me, and Dr. Alan Buzak does this wonderful job of unpacking that. And he says to walk humbly with God means to walk wherever God is walking in the world. So for me, that means all of the church should be deeply engaged in going wherever there is, where life is threatened, wherever there's structural and physical violence taking place, wherever just somebody's holding on just to a thread of hope. That's where we ought to be. And that's not relegated just to the pastor or to those who are part of the justice ministry. We are a just church, right? So that's I have more to that, but that
I'm
just
trying to tell y'all.
just to kind of simplify it, that's what I have grown to understand by experience. If you start off creating that just structure internally, you have more people who can join you in the justice work, because it really, all of us are required to be engaged in justice work. We're all required to name evil, to engage the powers, right? That's why Paul says, put on the full armor. He didn't say some of y'all put on the full armor, right? And so you don't put on armor if you're not going into battle. Right. So why are we putting on we are soldiers in the army. Well, if you in the army, somewhere, sometime you're going to engage in some battle, right? And so I just think that it's for all of us. And of course, it's about how do you, and that's the challenge for pastors, right? And leaders, to pull out of people what they're great at. Where do you fit in this movement? Because everybody's not going to do the same thing. And I think we have to give grace to people and understand they may not want to march. That's fine. Can you write a check? Right? I can't write a check. I don't want to march. Well, can you make this phone call? Right? So, or maybe you like the research. You can do that from home and not engage. You can just do our research for us. You can analyze data for us. So it's about really being able to. Research
is a tool that we need, right?
Yes,
that's still a part of the movement.
Yeah. So I think you have to understand first internally what that structure looks like, so that you can strategically put together the ways in which you're going to go outside the walls of the church and confront evil and engage the powers, so that the churches can, in some cases, become, others remain, places where justice, peace, love, liberation, and healing can be lived out. And I think that's why you have to think about a just church in that sense, up and against starting a justice ministry, right? So justice to flow throughout your church out into community. So I think the church, the just church would be one that exists to empower churches to respond to the internal and external forces that threaten the very existence of the local church and the universal church, quite frankly, as well as local and global communities. And in our context, it is, preserving Black life, right? Unapologetically. So that's how I would answer that question in terms of how I see why the need to have a just church up against focusing just on a justice ministry.
Yep, I love it. I love it. We often say, here that justice is an act of worship, right? And so when people are kind of like, well, I don't do that justice stuff, but I love God and I worship God. Well, that's also a way that we worship God. Right. And I'm trying to tell y'all, Reverend Ayers is about that life, because when we invited her to this, she was literally like, I'm at the Haitian border right now, but yes, count me in. And when I get back, I will, literally, she's about that life. So thank you. That's so rich. I know people's minds are just going with what you've given us. But let's go deeper.
Absolutely. The chat is on fire. Our hearts are on fire. And we hope y'all are picking up what Reverend Ayers is putting down, because it's already a rich conversation. So we want to go a bit deeper and further in the conversation. Can you talk a bit about how your work of justice and activism is informed by how you show up as a follower of Christ, and also your identity as a pastor?
Yeah, sure. This is such a amazing question and I had to, I'm pondering so many ways to go with that. So I'll answer it like this. The pastor, the preacher, the theologian, the mystic Howard Thurman, and his classic text, Jesus and the Disinherited, and in his opening chapter, the very first sentence, first paragraph, and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, many and varied are the interpretations of the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who I call the Black Messiah from Nazareth. But few of these interpretations deal with what the teachings and the life of Jesus and what they have to say to those who stand at a moment in time with their backs against the wall. I would remix that and say, what does this Jesus of Nazareth's teachings and life have to say to those of us in this moment in time who stand in America, in a country where we are literally, right, in my opinion, are in hostile territory. Right. And I think that the real reality is that we do have our backs against the wall, whether it's a form of physical or structural violence. We do indeed live in hostile territory every day. That could be a brother with a PhD who's getting stopped by the police, or that could be a brother on the corner selling loose cigarettes in front of a convenience store, right? That could be a Sandra Bland, that could be a Breonna Taylor, that could be any of us, right? With the microaggressions every day, right? So I think for me, as I think about Christ, for me, it is a Black Christ. he is a Black Messiah from Nazareth. He was born and raised in Northeast Africa. We can call it the Middle East.
Come on, Northeast.
Of Africa, if we want to. But the Bible we read, and the people in it, and the people who heard the stories, who heard the text read to them, the sacred text read when they stood in synagogues and read, when you hear them reading, those are Northeast African people, right? So for me, how do I follow Jesus? That's who I follow. I follow Jesus who went out in the streets. I follow Jesus who went and turned tables over, right? When he said in Luke 4:18, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to do what? Preach good news to the poor, which means if he turned them tables over, he set them free for the bad news of poverty and exploitation. So that's the Jesus I follow. That's the Jesus I know. That's the interpretation I have of Jesus, right? And so it's also this Jesus in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. When we see the parallel, yes, we see those blessings, and then we compare that to Luke. But in Matthew, as my New Testament professor, Dr. Warren Carter, would say, when you look at the first 4 or 5 verses in the Beatitudes, the blessings, the text says that Jesus went up to the mountain, he sat down and he began to teach them. He's talking to the disciples, he's teaching the disciples. And Dr. Carter suggests what's happening in that moment is Jesus is doing some habit forming and identity shaping of the disciples. And if we are the followers of Christ, then surely then we are to pick up on those habits and that identity. And if you go through those first 4 or 5 verses, we can over and hyper spiritualize it. Blessed are the poor, so they shall inherit the earth. When Carter is saying, don't spiritualize that. And that's not about the poor in spirit as in low as me. It is a way of talking about the way that the Roman Empire, right, was ruling in such a way that was oppressive and dehumanizing to the people. So that's how I understand Jesus, as one who dealt with powers, engaged in powers, called out powers. I mean, who else go march on Jerusalem on a donkey that represents the working people when those type of entries were reserved for who? The Roman generals who were coming in from defeating the enemy, right? So, Jesus was about that life. He was in the streets and he went up to the suites, right? And that's, for me, is what we do. And it is like a Dr. King, for me, for example, as we were kind of approaching that moment, right? King's faith, I tell people, he had his faith in public life. There was an intersection. There was no disconnect. And so it led him to the streets to march and protest, but clearly it led him into the corridors of power to impact public policy. So we'll talk a little more about that later. But so for me, that's how I follow Jesus. That's how I understand Christ. And that's how I understand what it means for me to be a disciple of Christ, right? And I also think, I forgot the other part of that question, but let me just keep saying, as a pastor.
No, I think you hit all facets of the question.
I actually want to keep you where you were going, because the next question we have for you dovetails into where I think you were going, because we were going to introduce, the fact that it is election day today. And we pray that everybody has voted today. We did our voting before the lecture. But I think you were going to dovetail into this anyhow, and what you kind of cut yourself off with, and we want to hear that. So our question is this, but give it to us however it hits you. As Christians who may occupy elected office, wonderful. I see Pamela did early voting. Yes, we have early voting options as well. So wonderful. But as those of us who identify as people of faith, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, for those who are either already interested in elected office or already hold elected office, because Double Love tends to attract a lot of people who are very engaged in the community because we are a justice church. What are some of the stories or the traps or the pause or the things that you have seen when we come into the space believing that we are going to change everything, and then we get in there and it's not as easy as we thought before we got elected? So I'm interested because I know that you do this work often and you share many relationships, but you also are not afraid to push even your friends to who we need to be. And I'm speaking as a friend. I know you will push me if something goes awry. So I'm interested in just like to simplify the question. It's election day, right? So we often vote for the Black folks, we vote for the folks that look like us, we vote for the folks that make us laugh, we vote for the folks, we often vote in a very emotional way. It's not always policy driven. And then when we get to voting about policy and things like that, sometimes there's a disconnect and we get torn. And so I'm just interested in just kind of how you map on everything you're sharing about being a just church, being a just Christian, but also how that maps onto these environments where people are having to make these kinds of decisions where there's a lot of gray area. So take that question wherever it takes you. But we just want to hear you think, hear your stories about, those kinds of roles.
Yeah, sure. Wow. So let me say it this way. So I'll give an example, a real life example of a good friend of mine. We met, I don't know, maybe 22 years ago, out on the streets, right? We were out doing our thing, protesting, marching, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew he always wanted to run for office one day. And eventually he has. Well, I won't say what office he holds, but he holds an office. And I know he went in wanting to do the right thing. I believe that, right? I really believe that. But see, what happens when it comes to, not all, but and let me say this too, caveat is everybody's social location is different, right? Your political power structure is going to be different from Dallas, different from Atlanta, right? But I think there are some overarching things we can think about in terms of if we know people who are proclaimed Christians who are in office, or just people that we want to support. So I think what happens for some of us, because one thing we're not good at, I'm gonna first start with the people. One thing we're not good at is understanding what it means to develop and create a pipeline of leaders to run for office, who have an affinity to us, who does not have to depend on money coming from another side of town, who then controls their interests once they're in office, controls their agenda once they're in office. Right. So I think one of the things we have to think about is how do we really understand what it means to, if we're a church even, to create a C4, where you can begin to, build up power by being able to create money, a pool of money where you can bring people in, train them, where they know, oh, when I run for office, I'm clear about to what end, no, why am I running, right? And to whose interest am I really serving when I get there? And because when you get there, if you don't have that real community support, that real backing, it's very easy to follow along with your colleagues, right? To be able to vote against your own community's interests. And if you don't believe me, just take an inventory of all your Black elected officials and tell me what those communities look like, the communities they serve. Tell me how they look. And I'm talking about, broadly, not one or two examples of how they're doing an amazing job. Because I can talk about Dallas. Where we live, I live out in Oak Cliff. It's primarily where most Black and brown people live. And I lived here long enough and it looks the same. It is now starting to change, right? And we know urban renewal, the old saying, urban renewal means Negro removal. And so all the things that we were lobbying for, advocating for to come to this side of town is now making it to this side of town with the elected officials we have. However, we're being gentrified, right? So all those Black faces and brown faces I used to see are not here anymore. They have been uprooted from all that they know, all the systems, the support systems that they're attached to, and our elected officials are silent, right? So I think it's a both and, right? We just can't say if you run for office, hold you accountable if we are not really assisting and helping people get in office and have some kind of affinity to the people that they really serve. And that requires being able to give them the money to run, and they understand you have a group of people behind you. If something goes down, we'll show up in mass numbers, right? Because that means something when you're down there trying to vote in City Hall. And I've heard this said to an elected official one time. I couldn't believe it. It opened my eyes tremendously. I was ear hustling. And it was time for a vote on something. And I heard the white elected official say from up north, he told one of our people down south, he said, you know what, you might as well go ahead and vote with us because don't nobody really support you. You were elected by like 500 votes. You don't even have a community behind you. And of course, he voted against his own community's interests, right? Because it's this idea of we don't have support. And so I just think the trappings can be, if you don't feel you really have a community that you really are indebted to, it's easy for you to perhaps pick up agendas that do not support your community or support you, right? Because in the long run, now these maps are redrawn. Some of these very people are getting ready to be drawn out of office. Right. And so that's why the advocacy, that's why building power needs to start early. You don't start it once you get in office. Like we have to learn what's our real power play 50, 100 years down the road, not the next election cycle. And also we cannot elect someone and just assume they're going to do the right thing. Right? Do we go to them and say, I know what your platform is. Let me see if it matches up to my platform. Okay, it does. I can't vote for you.
Let me see.
right? So let me see yours. Does it match up to what we want? No, it doesn't. You can't be my candidate. And if it does match up, I'm gonna hold you accountable for these things. And then you support that person, right? Do you show up to the meetings? Do you show up to, if you're able to, right? And that is the benefit of having someone on staff for justice ministry. Like I'm able to go to meetings during the daytime, but otherwise, people may not be able to go because they have to work every day. So I think it's all of that. It's, do we really create an environment? Do we really support those who want to run so they're clear about this is what we expect? Here are our expectations. We're with you if you keep lined up with why we have you elected. And when you don't, are we willing to call them out? And a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we re-elect the same people over and over again because there's something about this notion, don't talk about the Black folks because everybody's going to see and hear it. Now, I would be for that if we talk to you behind, back in the day, some of my mentors said what they would do is take people in the backyard and have a conversation before they went public, right? So do we do that first? Yes. And if that doesn't work, if you are going to be nothing more than a black face running whiteness, I can't support that. And I'm not going to sit back and not call you out publicly because you're causing harm. So if you're causing harm to Black bodies, I don't care what color you are, I'm going to call you out and I'm going to talk about it. And I think oftentimes we don't do that. And I think if people are thinking about running, I think how do you connect with like your congregation, right? How do they come and talk to you? What can we do to support you? How do we build this power together? Let's sit at this table and talk about this. And then after that, obviously, you have to do a lot of strategizing, kind of understanding how you're going to move politically, how you do. I mean, that's just all the strategizing that comes later when they're office, how you maintain that power and that seat and build on it. Right. And that takes, inside outside game, I do that as well. And that's just understanding who you're working with in that elected official. If I can really trust you, because trust is critical. And if I can trust you, and I've done that several times, right? Some people who have been elected, I've been able to do the inside outside game, because at the end of the day, it is politics. And when it comes to, you got to understand how politics works in theory. Then you got to understand how it works practically.
Right.
And practically, you absolutely have to wheel and deal. You absolutely have to give up this to get that. But what are you giving up? Okay. Right. So I know in white communities, they do that all the time, but they at least have grocery stores. The kids have parks and with slides and swing sets. You see what, can we get something out the deal? So I'm saying, that's a conversation that has to be how you strategically sit down, think about that. And for me, you say taking back our stuff, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's what it means to go back.
Yep. Where
has power been built before? Where have we done this before? Where have we been successful? And what were the pitfalls? Like, what should we not do this time around? So that's how I will answer. I know that's a lot, but when you start talking about elected officials, politics, but it's important for us to run, right? And why do I say that? Because we believe that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all those that deal with it. Why wouldn't we want to be a part of it, right? Because politics, what I tell people, it's just a distribution of resources. And that's what it is at the base. Now, of course, when you start adding in agendas, all this, it gets messy. So why wouldn't we want to be able to say, this goes here, this goes there, this money should go here, this money should go there? We should have a say-so in that. And policy is about who's deserving and entitled. And if somebody's sitting there telling your community, you know what, you're not deserving of fresh air, that's why we're going to put all these toxic waste dumps
Come on.
Community, where your kids get asthma, where you probably never had to take medication in your life, and then you got a dresser full of medication. I've done that right here in Dallas with Miss Marsha Jackson in Shingle Mountain. And that's the way that we show up and hold people accountable. And it's it's a form of pastoral care.
It is.
When we deal with these systems that wound people, they have to be cared for too. We have to expand that in idea of what pastoral care means. And that's offering pastoral care to Marsha and those who live in that infected area. That's exercising love and power, right? When we do that. And so I think that's what and we called out the mayor. And in Dallas, let me say this, prior to us having a new police chief, the fire chief, the sheriff, the mayor, the city manager, the city secretary, all Black. But yet, no resources are flowing to our side of town. And yet, we have 28 toxic waste dumps right in our own backyard next to people's homes. They have but I'm calling it anti-Black zoning policies, right? Because how can you zone residential area right next to toxic waste?
Yeah.
That would never happen north of downtown Dallas, ever. It would never happen, right? So I guess that answers your question. I don't know.
Yeah,
And I think,
no, you did.
No.
I love it. We only have one more for you because then
okay.
I know, but then Ken and Shanae are coming. So we just gonna
that's
fade
right.
to
Okay.
we gonna fade to the back. And then Ken and Shanae are gonna bring some things. Everyone who's in the Zoom, hey y'all. I see we got about 20 or so folks in the Zoom. Hey everybody, please jot your questions down. You can begin to put them in the chat or you can put them personally, but please, as Reverend Ayers is giving us all this good knowledge, I know y'all have feedback and we are coming to your questions momentarily. So we've got one more for you.
Okay.
And then Ken and Shanae are going to open up the Q&A section of this time together.
Absolutely. I want to underscore something Reverend Ayers said that I think is crucial, which is the kind of horizon and the timeline of how we view justice work. Not just from election cycle to election cycle,
yes,
not even from business cycle to business cycle. So often when we have a recession, we just want to get the economy back on track till it can expand again and we can have a so-called recovery. And then the vision of what policy does doesn't necessarily already go beyond the next business cycle. Whereas I think you're calling us to think about direct action. You're calling us to think about ourselves as voters, but also as planners who can help direct the way resources go and to where. So really appreciate the precision of the direction and instruction you're giving us.
Can I just say this one quick thing? I know we have to get to the Q&A because that's important when you just said the planning, because I think people need to understand policy is rarely written by the politician. I've written policy. I've done it at the municipal level and at the state level. It's people like us who sit at tables and say, this is what this should say. This is how it should read. And you obviously negotiate language, but we have that power, but you have to be in the room.
Absolutely. I appreciate you
that.
hopping in there. That deserves to be tweeted, Snapchatted, TikToked, and whatever other platforms that there be. So here's the last question I want to share before Ken and Shanae take us further. What you're talking about is work that obviously requires vigilance. It's demanding, staying on the wall. Can you talk to us a bit about how you draw boundaries between the work of pursuing freedom and justice and attending to your well-being? And, if we are in a battlefield and if Audre Lorde is right that taking care of ourselves is an act of political warfare, how do you manage fighting the war outside and the war to kind of take care of yourself?
Yeah, so first thing I'll say, I firmly believe that no is a complete sentence. So I will say no, period, the end. There's no conversation and discussion, right? When I feel the need for me to step back and to take, to do acts of self-care. So how I balance that, one thing I definitely do, I absolutely take vacation. Because this work never stops, right? So you can't say I'm gonna wait till things calm down. They never do. So I just have to make that decision, say I'm going on vacation, period, the end. I'm out of here, right? And when I do, the phone is off, right? I don't, because I know if I have it on, I'm gonna answer that email. And so for me, it's about really just saying, this is my vacation time. I map it out. I'm going this week and that I'm leaving. I'm leaving no matter what's going on, right? And it's really having hard boundaries with people, because in this work, people can really believe you're accessible 24 hours, 7 days a week, and their emergency, right, becomes your emergency, right? And so for me, it's certain days a week, I simply do not take meetings, right? I use that day to do really centering myself for the week, and usually it's Mondays, right? Because I make sure that week on a Monday, I'm really centering myself. I'm preparing myself for the week ahead so that I can be prepared for the battle, right? I think it was James Baldwin that says that's one of the tricks of this work, right? I'm paraphrasing, is to make you so weary and worn that you're no longer prepared to fight. And that is, I think, part of why we have to be critical about our self-care and balance personal life with the work that we do, because you have to have I make sure I have a personal life. I have friends that do things outside of church, because this is not a 9-to-5 job, right? This is full-time ministry for me. So there's no set hours per se. So I have to create my own boundaries and just be okay with sticking to those. Now, obviously, emergency, someone really needs, a form of pastoral care, something that's happened, I make exceptions, but by and large, I think I do a good job, right, of making sure I tend to my inner sanctuary. As a matter of fact, I'm going through the 40-day journey with Howard Thurman, just doing things like that, right? Spiritual practices. that I make sure I hold tight to make sure that I don't lose myself in all of this, because you can take on a lot of what's out there, right? And who wouldn't need a break from always seeing Black folks always being dehumanized, disrespected, who doesn't need a break from that, right? Right. You have to do that. So that's honestly, that's what I do. I'll say no. That's a way of setting a boundary. I absolutely take vacation. That's a way of me making boundaries and really ordering my week and my work in a way that I make sure I have time for myself, even if it's going to Target, just walking around, because I love Target, y'all. I go in, I go for 2 things, I leave them, my bill $100. I'm like, what did I get? I said, you sure? So yeah, so I think it's just what makes me happy, and friends, obviously, going to brunch, just laughing. I love to laugh. So just hanging with my friends, and not Pastor Danielle. We just either sorors having a good time or just friends. We're just kicking. I have stuff in my house on the weekend, right? Let's just come and just hang out at the pool or whatever. So that's really what I do. It's not that deep. I say no, and I take time for myself.
Listen, I have been to meals. Did we do brunch? We did dinner.
We did dinner
with Reverend Ayers, and yeah, she's for real. We probably the loudest. Yeah, you need that. So I am adding and entering the chat, entering the spotlighted videos are Ken and Shanae, because we could sit up here and talk to you all day, but we did put a little agenda together on purpose, because every voice, we really value amplifying different voices at Double Love. And so we have a certain perspective that we're interested in as pastors, but our members have a certain perspective from the work that they do. So we are going to share the facilitating space now with 2 of our dope members, Ken and Shanae, and let them kind of kick off this Q&A segment. And then y'all get ready. Facebook too. Evelyn is manning the Facebook chat, so she's gonna see those chats. But y'all get ready for your dimension of questions. But Ken and Shanae, go for it.
Sweet. Ken, should I start?
Go for it. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, I think as soon as you started talking about self-care and then referencing Howard Thurman, I immediately was like, oh my goodness, this is so great, because every time Ken and I talk, we reference Howard Thurman. It's just something about that man.
I'm so proud right now. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
But earlier this year, we co-hosted an event during February on Black imagination and thinking about deconstructing our own anti-Blackness and the relationship it has to dreaming, how dreaming is an antidote to what ails us, and really attempted to establish a place where we could practice meditating, practice imagining our futures together. And so we wanted to extend that question or that conversation to you, given the topic of today, and thinking about, what deconstructing or unpacking our anti-Blackness has to do with dreaming, specifically for you and your work.
Oh, yes. So let me answer that 2 ways. I think I want to try to answer it 2 ways. So definitely, I think to nurture, to nourish our Blackness is critical and important. Because like I mentioned before, we live in a hostile territory, right? And I also say that anti-Blackness, as we know, comes in the form of colorism and internalized oppression, right? So I think we, have to, as we're dreaming, as we're even envisioning, right, to dream and to envision, to radically reimagine what it looks like to flourish, for Black lives to flourish, I'm going to go to what my pastor has lately been quoting Dr. Stacey Point Thomas, who says, but at some point we have to ask the question, what does Black lives mean to Black people? And I think about, what's going on at Howard currently, for example. How is it that we send off our children to a Black institution and they're getting, now this is a white school, we will be marching, we will be everywhere, we will be sounding the alarm, right? And so this goes back to how we can identify that anti-Blackness, and how do we call that out in the midst of trying to imagine in that moment, well, what is the alternative? What can we do? Because I think we start talking about deconstructing anti-Blackness. It's a heart issue at the end of the day, right? That's a personal heart issue about people. When you're whether you Black or white or anything else, if you are anti-Black, there's something about you that thinks that you can devalue, right, the Black body. So for me, I think when we think about that, you have to do that in order to dream, in order to imagine, and you have to do a self-check on that, right? So obviously that's internal, and definitely, you know, we have to deconstruct that anti-Blackness externally as well. So when we talk about doing that, I don't think what we're saying, I think the way I understand that is when I'm dreaming, I'm thinking about what can we do in the midst of all this that we're up against. I'm thinking about what laws can we get passed? What policy do we get passed? What systems can we tear down? What social structures do we need to radically reimagine that causes harm to Black bodies? Because again, that the heart issue, that has to be worked out among those who have some kind of internalized struggle, right? Because if it was a simple, and it's a conversation they need to have when it's white folks, y'all have that with each other. You have to do that work. I can't do that work. Because if it was as simple as that, we have had, think about it, all the watershed legislation we've had, whether that's the Emancipation Proclamation, whether that's the Voting Rights of 1964, 65, Civil Rights Act, you just name these, Housing Act, you name these watershed pieces that are designed to combat those policies and laws that were against Black flourishing. And we're still having the same conversation. Why? It's because it's deeply rooted in structures, but it's also people who step into those spaces, whatever color they may be, that they have bought into the lie, as Baldwin would say, right? That whiteness is greater, and that we all must bow down to that, or we are under that, and that we're not interrogating then all these systems that are upheld by whiteness. And if I say white supremacy, check me on that, because my mentor, Dr. Ivy Carruthers, is saying we should really not say white supremacy, because we're reinforcing, and there's nothing supreme about whiteness, right? So I think when I think about, that's what I think about when I hear that. That's what I hear, right? So I think it's important to dream, to radically reimagine, to envision what Black flourishing looks like, so that, you know, and I think part of that is how we engage in sacred memory. Because I think we have to understand that when we talk about, because here's what I believe about Black folks, I think we're the most creative, innovative, imaginative, you name it, we're gonna do it, we're gonna create it. But I think sacred memory allows us to understand that we do this, right, as a continuum. That if we look back in a couple moments, we've been here before. This is 2021. We are closing out this year of the 100 commemoration of Black Wall Street, or of the Greenwood District. I like to always point out it was the people that made Black Wall Street, the business didn't make the people. It was a mindset of collective working responsibility. It was cooperative economics. It was understanding and loving their Blackness in its fullness. Because that's not what A.W. Gurley was doing. Was he not radically reimagining, dreaming, and envisioning in the midst of anti-Blackness there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when he bought those 40 acres? He said only Black people can buy this land, live on this land. I mean, he was FUBU before FUBU, right? He understood that he had to do what he needs to do in order for Black lives to flourish. And of course, we look back, and what do we have to look at? That you had a self-contained, self-sufficient community. They didn't have to leave for anything. Oh, we need a bus ride. Oh, but no problem. We own a bus transportation system. The car takes us too long to get there. No problem. We have airplanes. You name it. I want to go see a good movie. Don't worry, that sister down the street owns a Dreamland Theater. You can go there and watch your movie. Oh, you want candy? She has a confectionery too. Oh, you want a fur to go to church on Sundays? Don't worry, it's a furry around the corner, right? Everything was there. And I think that is a classic example of what does it mean for us to dream and to imagine. And I think Gurley wasn't trying to deconstruct anti-Blackness as much as he was trying to build and imagine and affirm that we are Black and we are beautiful, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? So I think that's so important. I love that. I would just love to know how that went when you all did it. That sounds like that was an amazing experience, because I love being around Black folks who are just dreaming and imagining, because Lord knows we have enough that we have to consume, right? That can consume and overtake you and make you feel like this is the end. But I think sacred memory is critical in that moment, because we can always say, this is who we are. This is what we do. We make way out of no way. We lead the way in so many ways. And folks obviously come take our stuff. You got culture vultures that are out there. And so how do we, also own our stuff and stop giving it all away? Because sometimes, we give over our power. We give over our intellectual property. We give over to those things. And so, so I think that's how we'll answer that. I think that's how I understand it. And that's how I engage in the work. And that's how I deal with anti-Blackness, rather that's coming from internally by way of community and externally. So internally, I do a little more conversation having, and nurturing people like that, right? Because I know that's a form of self-hatred, right? So you have to ask yourself, what is it about yourself that you don't like? That causes you to carry out, right? What I'm saying, the plan of the enemy, right? What causes you to do that for somebody that looks just like you? And I look at the mayor of the city, when Marsha Jackson, who was a Black grandmother, who looked just like his mother, who looks like his wife, who looks like his daughter, he'd never once in 3 years bothered to even call her name. He never once bothered to recognize and acknowledge the fact that she had fallen ill because they put toxic waste next to her home, right? So now, but what did we do as Black folks? We started radically reimagining. What does it look like to have all that toxic waste moved? And now we have put forth a neighborhood plan, the first in the city, south of downtown, where Black and brown people got together and said, now that toxic waste is gone, we want soccer fields. We want a place to be able to have a walking trail. So, a horse trail. So all of that's, to me, that's what that means, right? So our deconstruction of anti-Blackness has more to do with, we're going to reclaim, first, we're going to reclaim what was before the destruction. Right. And at the same time, we're going to try to change these racist zoning policies, and we're going to call out the ways in which you're anti-Black, and you need to deal with that. But we're going to keep on dreaming. We're going to keep on imagining in spite of.
Thank you for that. So many thoughts. One of my first thoughts was the opportunity to see Prince Rogers Nelson in Baltimore when he did his Freddie Gray performance and tribute. And he had a moment where he said, next time I come through Baltimore, I want to get picked up by a car service that's owned by one of us. I want to get dropped off to a hotel that's owned by one of us. The piece we need is PIECE. And I think there's something beautiful definitely about that notion of where we take this power to the next level. And then I guess I was struck by this idea of continuum and this idea of memory and how we kind of build the institutional awareness and memory over generations so that we can grow that power, so that we can expand that power. And one thing that came to mind was the ways in which that power is constantly under siege. And I think about hyper-surveillance, I think about hyper-policing, and I think about the things that we, as generations represented on this call, didn't have to grow up with, didn't have to grow up under. Kept thinking about that when I saw so many Ring cameras on Halloween videos from front porches, and thinking about ways in which we have strategic discretion. It's a term that I heard Professor Ruha Benjamin mention in terms of the ways over history we've used strategic discretion to be mindful of kind of aspects that we don't always document, that we don't always highlight. And I guess just striking that balance between our own internal safety in this work, but also the need to preserve memory and move power and expand power for our own community, for our own sake. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that balance.
So I want to pick up on this notion of when you said hyper surveillance, right? One of the things I've been saying a lot about is really, I guess, since 2013, where I think social media really began to take a turn where we became even more hyper connected. I think that sometimes we do too much above ground. I think sometimes we put too much of ourselves out there. I think we have to learn how we preserve power, how we preserve sacred memory. Some of this has to be underground work, right? Everything is not meant to be consumed by the public. It's not meant to be consumed via, social media, in my opinion. That's just how I see that. Because sometimes that's how we can sometimes have our peace disrupted in ways, because we are so accessible. And I think it makes us even more vulnerable to a lot of to the hyper surveillance. So people don't get, like, when you put, I'm here, I'm checking in here, that's being captured, right? But I think it's just so normal for people to check in everywhere now. It's just a thing to do, but you need to understand, it's not just me seeing you checked in, right? And especially if you're going to be vocal and you are in this movement building work, in my opinion, you have to be very strategic in the ways and what you allow to be seen and what you allow to be heard. As I think that happens, and I think my thing is I try to be low key as possible, and I do a lot of surveillance when I'm just standing around and I watch people at rallies, right? I think even that, like I have a team of people, when we go, we are scoping out the people who scoping us out. Right? You have to be able to understand we're out here, but you need to know people are watching, they're showing up, and they're looking for ways to disrupt. They're looking for ways to continue to dehumanize, and to disrupt. And I think that we have to just be more strategic in how we approach the justice work. It just, in my opinion, I think we just have to be I just think we put too much out there sometimes. Everybody doesn't even know what we're doing next. There's no need to say we're gonna do this and just say meet us here. We do that now, right? We have a Black-owned restaurant that we will sometimes say meet us here. We're not putting anything in a group chat. It's gonna say come here at this time. We're not taking notes. Nobody Zoom. You can't Zoom in. If you can't come, then we'll give you the notes. You get the cliff notes. We're not, because we know the game, right? I think we all know that by now how this works, how that information is being captured in ways that can be disruptive. And I want to go back to something else you said when you mentioned when Prince said when he comes back he wants to have a Black person pick him up. I think economic power is absolutely, for me, is the base in which we can really build community. Because when you control your economics, you control your politics, thereby you control resources. And so I think that's and if anything's a lesson on Black Wall Street, it ought to be that, in my opinion. And even now, our commemoration of Black Wall Street, this last 100 days, we have this thing called 100 Days of Buying Black. And so I'm asking everybody to buy Black, report your dollars. Now, people are not reporting like they should be. They just tell me they're buying Black. But 38 days in, we are at little over $250,000 of people recirculating the dollar back into community, right? And so for me, it's not even when this year ends, I need you to keep buying Black, right? It's this idea of how do we circulate the dollar so we can build capacity, increase sales and growth, so we can have job creation. So when our kids do come out of college, can we provide a safe place for them to work and to live and to flourish, right? And I think when you control the money, again, now you control those politics, because now I can say, I can put my money behind this candidate. If you, that's how it works now. Those lobbies, when I'm down in Austin, I'm just a little country Southern girl, Black girl down here in Austin, going into these meetings, sitting in these rooms, and these are lobbyists who are down here every day buying lunch. They have the money. But I have the Lord, and I got a little sense, and I know a little something because, because I'm currently finishing up my master's in public policy. And so I'm just saying that's what money, I know what money can do when you have it. And you're trying to really build power, control your resources, and build not a neighborhood, but build a community. And that's so critical. And I think we have to be able to think that way, that how can, when we think about, I need this, oh, well, where is a Black person? Does a Black person have this? I don't think Black first. And what does that mean? I think obviously Prince understood that very well, right? And including his own battle, trying to get his master's, right? So he understood how power works. And come on, look at all the money he had. And he's like, I can't get my master's. So I think that we just have to understand that we can hold that power. And there are ways that we can do that, and ways that we can have discretion in how we move around in this space.
Whoa.
I don't know if that answer addressed your question, but
yeah.
Before, I'm sure Ken and I could probably continue asking a bunch of questions, and we do have our little bank. But before that, does anyone, I know that there are questions, would anyone like to raise their hand, come off mute, or type their question in the chat?
I'm going to be a moderator voice to let people know. We didn't tell you all what time this ends. We've actually planned for your questions. So we have planned to be here until 8:30. So you are not the person who's asking the question that keeps the class here longer. We intended to be, because I'm looking at the clock and we're right at the 1 hour mark. We are where we want to be. So I just want you all to know that you are not going over time. We intentionally made this 30 minutes longer because last year we needed more time to get more questions in.
Okay, so
I'll keep an eye out. I'll keep an eye out in the meantime.
Okay. So this question stems from actually last weekend, I was having a conversation with a person I just met. And while we were talking, she had just asked me flat out, "Are you a Christian?" And I said yes, but then I also began to like over explain. Like I was like, well, like the things in the news and, and all those sorts of things. And she was like, "I don't think I've ever met a Christian who can just answer that question with yes."
Mhm.
Like, and so I just thinking about, again, talking about our faith in the public square, I was curious about your experience with that when people ask you, "Are you a Christian?" Because like I emphatically am like, yes, I love Jesus. And then I also feel this need to
Mhm.
create distance or space from who sometimes gets like the louder mic regarding the Christianity, especially when their faith is used to like defend their harmful ideas or thoughts about people, especially in policy. So I wanted to know if you had any words of experience, words of advice, encouragement. How do you detangle those things? Because the world is quite wicked at times. But you mentioned I have the Lord, I have a couple cents, and yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh yeah, that's such a good question. So let me say it this way. Let me back into that question. So how I understand myself, I say I'm a sojourner truth type of Christian. That Christian that show up where they tell you not to show up, and if like Sojourner Truth went to that women's convention when she was told not to show up, and emphatically asked the rhetorical question, "Ain't I a woman?" Right? That Ida Bell Wells Barnett type of Christian. You come back to Memphis, we hanging you and we burning everything down. And she goes overseas to launch her anti-lynching campaign and comes back and goes throughout the entire country and does what she does, including suing a railroad company in 1845 and wins a judgment. That Fannie Hamer type of Christian, right? Who not only fought for voting rights, but she called America to the carpet on their mess. She also purchased land, right, to make sure people could feed themselves and eat. And I like Fannie Hamer, that kind of Christian, because she also, while at home, when she asked how does she protect her home, she says she prays, she has the Lord, and she has her steel. Right. So for me, that's how I understand myself as a Christian and how I show up. So I don't say that to people. They say, "Are you a Christian?" I say yes, because that's a whole sentence too, right? Just like no. Now, if they want to engage, then I'll have this conversation. But what I also understand when people ask that question or say that, I think they're asking that based on, white evangelical, because that's the dominant narrative in America, right? It is white evangelical Christianity. And I think when they ask that question, they're trying to get to the point of why would you be practicing this version, right, of Christianity that seems to be harmful. The hatred that's spewed, right, from so-called Christians for real, right? So I think when people say that, that's how I hear that oftentimes, is they're looking at this more dominant narrative of what it means to be Christian. So then what I'll do, depending on how, and you can kind of gauge if people are genuinely asking you that question, or if they just want to banter. Depending on how I feel, I'll engage the banter, right? And then other times I won't. So I think for me, it's just really about how sometimes it's just, informing and educating people, right? To say that, understand that Black folks, because you got to understand yourself, and that depends on how you see yourself in the world, how you show up. Like for me, I see myself as a Pan-African woman, right? I consider myself to be part of the African diaspora. So when you ask me that question, I'm going to say, well, folks understood who Christ was before they ever saw a European. Right? It's really reclaiming, that's taking back our stuff, right? That's going back to understand that some Africans knew who Christ was before they saw a European when they came on these shores. And I think we have well documented, depending on what you read, right? That also goes to what you read to shape your theological worldview, what you read to develop your spiritual practices. Like all of this really matters. And that's how you respond to people. Because I feel what you're saying, because I wasn't always in this place, this space. I used to do the same thing, right? Well, no, because no. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Well, like this is crazy. So for me, it was just evolution. So I think, but the more I read and I became more comfortable with how I understood God in the world and how I did more history searching, right? And reading about Christianity and understanding geography and understand like, oh, those are Black folks they were talking about. That's Northeast Africa. So it makes sense that, so you understand. So I think it's understanding that in ways in which, because I think that's how people are asking the question. They're trying to figure out, how are you a part of this Christianity that does this and this and this, that seems to be harming people, that seems to dehumanize, that seems to really cause havoc, right, in the world, not just in America, but in the world. Even in Texas, our Texas legislator, all of that whole agenda of the government was anti-Black, homophobic, ableist. It was really anti-human, right? It was misogynistic, but they all talk about God has called them to this work. So then we say, oh, you have the God of Bull Connor, right? So, and we have the God of King, we have, the God of Rosa Parks, etc., right? And so I think that's how people are asking that question. And so in this day, I don't over explain. I'll just say, well, let me just tell you, it's two different gods here, right? That God believes that it's relegated to the four walls of the church, that God is only concerned about, where you go after this life. And the God we serve is concerned about the body and the soul. What happens when we come out this church on Sunday, what happens Monday through Saturday, God cares and he has something to say about that. So then when I start doing all that, then they walk away. At that point, the conversation either is over or they want to really have a real dialogue and a real conversation. So, cause hey, we can go Bible if you want to do that, pull your Bible out. So when people do, I'm like, well, let's go Bible then. Let's, we gonna go through it. Then it's like, well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. No problem. So I think that's why it's so important, I think, for us to take back our stuff in that regard, to understand what it means to be Black and Christian, not just in America, but Black and Christian in the world. And I think that requires us to do that type of reading and really developing those spiritual practices and that spiritual formation. So because then less and less you'll feel the need to like over explain. You would just say, yes, I am. And then they have a follow-up question, then, you just go right in and and that could either make them move on if they're not, saying it with good intentions, right? Or if they just really want to learn and they really want to learn, I'm all for that. But that'll kind of, I think, when you can answer that way, that'll kind of help you kind of move in that space. But for me, that took time. That wasn't, the first thing I did. Because I didn't join church until I was like 18. So I didn't grow up in church. So, I really didn't even get really involved in church. So I moved to Dallas and joined Friendship West at about 23. So fortunately, all I know is, Friendship West by way of theological orientation. So, I kind of started off, Black theology, and obviously as time moved on, as Dr. Haynes really grew, evolved, and Dr. Ibeker Brothers became my mentor, and so many other amazing people came into my life, and that just opened up the world, right? Where I was able to really understand myself as a Black woman, a Black Christian woman, in the diaspora and not just in America. And so I think that's how I was able to really, it's just been a real blessing. Then I'm saying it out loud. I just never really talked about this, but I think that's how I've been able to really move and have my being in this answer flat-footed, like a sojourner, like 10 toes down. Yes, I'm Christian. What's next? What are we doing next? And it's also
what else do you want to know?
Yeah, what else do you want to know? Let's talk about it. And so I think it's been great when I'm in spaces where I don't, and of course I'm just moving around. When I go to Austin, I'm in all this workout. If people know me, they know I'm a pastor, but otherwise I show up as Danielle. And then they say, oh, you at a church? I'm like, yeah. Like, what church is that? And I tell them, oh, I would go to a church like that. So it's really about, it's about being human. It's about really loving people in ways, as Thurman would say, love is in the particular. You show me you love me. And that love looks different in many different ways. Like, do we expand our understanding of what love looks like? It's so important. I think that's how. So I think when people ask that question, if they're genuine, they're just trying to figure out, especially you Black, they like, that's the God you serving. And that's why when people say, that's the white man's religion. Well, which one? Not the one I'm practicing.
And I think that the question often comes after spending, like this, in the context of this, it was like after spending an entire weekend with a person and then being like, wait a minute, this person I've been with all weekend also follows Jesus. I'm like, yeah.
Well, that's a testament to who you are as a person, right? That you obviously presented yourself and showed up in a way that they thought was very admirable, right? And like, oh, and on top of that, you a Christian? As if that's not how Christians are. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
And I told this to pastors Gabby and Andrew. I would encourage, I don't know if you all have seen The Family on Netflix, but I think if you watch The Family on Netflix, it's an eye-opening just in terms of how it's clear we are not serving the same Christ, and how the National Prayer Breakfast, right, is really a front to maintain power in the name of God. So you just gotta watch it. You just have to watch it. It's an excellent, you have to check it out. And I'm gonna tell you one thing they say, that, and this goes back to what I said earlier about underground, everything doesn't have to be on top ground. One of the things that Doug Coe, who is the leader, though they say it's not an organization, here's what he's on tape with saying: you become more powerful the more invisible your institution is. Because and they have access to world leaders. They have access to senators. I mean, you have to watch it. And that's what I mean by, as Black folk, those of us who buy into that dualistic theology, that we as churches, we ought not be engaged in politics, that's separate. We shouldn't talk about that. God does not have us, while we're preaching that for white people, they over here gaining power and maintaining power. And that's why we have voter suppression laws in Texas. We don't have a voter fraud problem in Texas. We have a new emerging Texas that's not white, and that's the problem. And so they've redrawn these maps, and they literally have redrawn Black folks out of office. And you can't, and I believe myself to be a good organizer, but you can't organize out of gerrymandering. That's a hard thing to do. It's, so I think that's how we get caught slipping when we're preaching and teaching that, and we believe we shouldn't be talking about politics and engaged in that, while the whole time they are. Yep. And we're looking up, and here we are.
Yep. Wow, there's a lot in there, and want to get to a question from the chat as well. But one thing that came to mind, the lifting up of our ancestors, Sojourner Truth, something that I didn't realize actually until I saw a photo exhibit, a public photo exhibit uptown in Harlem at one of the parks, was that I didn't know Sojourner Truth's IP story. So she owned her intellectual property. So anytime you saw a photo of her, she actually had it copywritten and would put it on postcards, would put it, in a range of different places that she would receive, financial benefit from the distribution of these postcards that she actually owned. And the postcards would say a slogan that said, I sell the shadow to support the substance. And this was Sojourner Truth in the, 1800s, right? And just that notion of like, this was a way to offset, even in her later days, like that was her part of her retirement plan, was having the income from this avenue of ownership, not giving away her stuff, and realizing that there was an avenue that she could carve out for that. One of the questions was, do you feel there is a place in the pulpit for politics? And this is a question that was uplifted by Pamela Sally. Do you feel there is a place in the pulpit for politics? Should pastors address these issues Sunday morning? And I know you were just speaking a little bit to, the dynamics of us being involved in the political. And so if you could expound a little more on that.
Right. I absolutely think there's a place for the pastor to talk. And I think we have to recover the word politics. I think it's become so dirty, right? It's this, I think when people hear that, they have a perception of what that is and what it is not. And I think it's the way in which a pastor should be able to pull in, that whole notion of the Bible in one hand, the newspaper in the other, with manage a tablet, right? In the other, just to be able to talk about politics as a way of distributing resources. That's what it is. So therefore, is the pastor addressing what's happening in real time? What's impacting people every day? What's impacting people who are sitting down in the congregation and the people to whom you are preaching to? Are you touching on what they're dealing with when they leave your church on Sunday morning, right? And I think that, yes, I think that is something that should be addressed from the pulpit. And that has to do with your hermeneutic on text, how you pull that in, how you preach a text, and how you connect that with current day life, what's going on currently, and how you're able to get people to see the connection, right? What the word what does God have to say about this issue that is happening in the world? Because God clearly cares about that, right? So I would say yes. And that may be just how you, and if you haven't done that, then that may be taking time to really understand, for you as a pastor to understand how you understand politics. How do you define that? And what are the ways in which you begin to preach that to your congregation in ways that connects that directly to the sacred text you're preaching from. And I think there's a way to do that in many ways, right? Now even think about, we're coming out of Esther this trimester, we're doing the book of Esther, right? I'm just thinking that's a good text. I mean, did Esther not? As she was undoubtedly a Hebrew woman, right? Young girl. And she was definitely engaged in the political power structure. And so much so she shifted the dynamics in such a way where ultimately, right, when you read that, she went from being this obscure orphan to being drawn, I'm gonna say she was put in the palace, because we don't know if she willingly went. She didn't have a choice to go. The king put out the call, she had to go. But she's this pawn between these three men, but at some point she understands that power shift and power dynamic. She understood that I have to be engaged in this political power structure if the people are going to make it. If my people are going to make it up out of this, I'm going to have to make some moves and deal with these dynamics. And she did that. And if you read it, did that way by chapter 8. She's now over political appointments, the money. She put Mordecai in Haman's old place. I mean, she was able to work that and navigate that power structure. So I think there's plenty of ways I think we can talk about politics and the text from the pulpit in ways that I think frees people up and offers not only hope, but a transformative hope, whereby when they come back Sunday after Sunday, they're not going back to the same thing, and we're just making people feel good for the moment, only for them to go back home and say, I still got to pay this bill, or I'm still breathing in this bad air. Right? I think you have to be able to deal with that, and I think that's what we attempt to do every Sunday. We attempt to deal with what people are hearing and seeing on the news. How are you interpreting that for people? Other than that, they're going to get the interpretation somewhere else, and then is that going to go up against what you're teaching and preaching? Because here's the other reality: if you're not doing that, I do this work, and I know a lot of people who are in this work have a very clear sense of what it is, and they go to churches who would never bring up politics, but they understand it. They just still go to the church, and they're like, well, I just know I'm not going to get it there. But I believe God is calling me to do this work, and they do it outside, again, without sanctuary. They're doing it anyway. So I just think I think it's certainly, I think pastors, absolutely. I think that's part of the pastor. And that's how you going to feed the sheep and fight the wolf. If you don't know what the wolf is doing, you're not talking about it. If that's what pastors do, if we're to feed the sheep. And when Jesus said, have that balance between, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, or King would say, a tough mind and a tender heart. The tough mind is be able to think strategically about how to deal with what's going on in the world. So yes, I think there's a place for it. And obviously that can show up and look different in different ways, depending on your theological worldview, your hermeneutical lens, and how you understand issues. Because that will require a pastor to really study what's happening, understanding policy, understanding laws, and that connection and who it's impacting. That's just what you call studying, getting ready to preach. So that's part of, the preparation process, in my opinion.
Thank you. I see another question came in. Reverend Michael Westbrook asked, as the Black church, how do we connect with the Black men who have immigrated to the US, such as people from Haiti, Guyana, the Caribbean, and the African continent, etc. ...
Yeah. So I think one of the ways, depending on where you are, I'm not sure where you're located. So for me, what I have done, I just kind of put a search out and find out where are the enclaves, where are people in the city. And sometimes, depending on the community, now particularly my experience with the Haitian community, it's good to find one person that trusts you, because they're going to be very guarded, right? So it's about how do you connect and build that trust with a person who can then go into that community and quote unquote vouch for you, right? But what I've also learned is when we are intentional about showing up as I'm your fellow Black person in the diaspora, not that I'm coming to help you, right? I think you're able to then move into those spaces and sit, listen, and learn who they are, what the needs are, how we might be able to connect and partner with one another. I'm not sure what you will be connecting with those Black men, if the purpose, I don't know if the purpose is to connect, right? I don't know what that is, but I think if you're going to try to connect, I think you have to be clear on why you're going into that community, and making sure you go in understanding that you may not necessarily, that we're not taking light to them, the light is already there, so to speak, right? So I just think for me, that's how I've been able to connect with various communities in Dallas, because we have quite a few Ethiopian, Nigerian, Haitian community, Dominican, nothing like New York, right? But we have like small enclaves. And so that's how I've been able to do it. I'll find a person and I'll just say, we just want to connect, because we see all of ourselves as being able to deal with the same, structures, the colonialism, imperialism, that we all are impacted by that. And we just want to see how we can work together. So I approach it from I'm coming to listen and to learn and find out, well, what is it that you need from us? Is there something you need? How can we help you? And that's how I've been able to kind of go in and do the work with other people, particularly, those in the diaspora who find themselves here in Dallas or the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then something to say that, and sometimes it happens for me, I connect with the Ethiopian community because I can't remember what happened. And I had Dr. Hanks talk about something and they were like, oh, y'all know that's happening. And they reached out, right? And they're like, we're so glad to hear somebody mention this happened in our country. And then they were like, well, what else did you all do? And I'm like, oh, well, not that much. We just felt we had to say something because we care about what happened. So sometimes that's also a way where people can connect with you as well, is, are you talking about, what is, now Haiti is a simple one because we know what's going on there. And I think it's just, how do you, whatever you're looking to do to assist and to help, the Haitian migrant works. I mean, this is an opportune time to really connect with communities. We were down there for about 3 or 4 days. And but we've been involved with Haiti since about 2010 after the first earthquake. We were there in Haiti and then ongoing support. And then another way to do that is to talk to like a Lot Carey, for example, who as a mission organization, Black-led, founded by a former enslaved African Black-led, who can connect you also with those communities as well.
Wow, thank you so much. Yes, we're very active in Lot Carey. Amazing. So I think this is probably like a good time to...
I'm gonna do your Whopper Junior, and can I add
Alexis,
bacon sandwich only?
Alexis, your order is really impressive. If you could, we'll take a large fry, but
maybe a little milkshake. Okay, I was like,
hey, what?
No,
a
all
Whopper?
good. All good. Listen, a couple of shout outs. It happens. Thank you, Alexis, for being present, truly, for making the time before dinner. Like,
right.
Truly, thank you. So, wanted to acknowledge a couple of things. First off, shout out to Reverend Kelly Farrell for pulling up with her class and having members of a class that she teaches be present for today's conversation. So thank you, Reverend Kelly. Also, wanted to acknowledge, this is an amazing week that we've got lined up. So we've got a series of conversations that are ongoing, that are going to be happening. And, tomorrow we're going to be joined by Reverend Dr. James Forbes. And so, we're looking forward to a magnificent conversation. Thank you to Pastor Andrew for, rekindling that connection and having him be present. We're just so grateful to have this conversation and make space for faith in the public square. I guess, one of the questions that drop a high in the class. If you're in the class, drop a high if you're in Dr. Kelly's class. But one of the questions that we had, that I had certainly is, you mentioned revisiting Howard Thurman's work, and I was curious kind of what made you revisit, what made you reflect. What is it about this moment in time for you that is kind of causing you to make that bridge to think about that connection and relationship to the text?
Yeah, so I really just felt I need to do something a little different in terms of my morning meditation and spiritual practice. So I journal already, but I took this Howard Thurman class in seminary, and I have every book the Howard Thurman wrote, right? So I was like, I forgot I had the 40-day journal. I never used it before. And I knew if I did it, because as we know Thurman, it's going to be definitely, you talking about yourself, you're going into your inner sanctuary, you're going to meditate in between, the questions. And so I said, this may be a good way for me to have another way of connecting to the divine, right? To spend time with God. And it has been a blessing, right? And they recommend, you do 40 days straight. So it also is a way to keep me focused to do this every day. And so I just felt that I needed a little more centering. I wanted to do something a little different, a little more challenging too, right? Because the way the book is laid out, you have a scripture, you meditate for 20 minutes, then you have a series of questions to answer where you have to sit and think about it and think about yourself. Answer honestly. And then you have like some bullets that they ask you, well, what about this? It's just a really reflective way to start the morning in ways that kind of gives a lot of prompts, right? So I just felt I needed that. And that's what made me kind of return back to the 40-day journal that I never used. Now, Jesus Disinherited, I'm always in that text. That's just kind of something that one that I really love. And also Meditations of the Heart, right? Just kind of, that's what I normally grab one, read it, keep moving. But the 40-day journal is definitely more engaging and really has you really thinking about the ways in which you go about your day and see yourself and how you show up in the world and how you make sure you are cleansing yourself so you're not bleeding on the people. So. And that's so important in this work because it can certainly happen with so much going on. So it's an excellent book. It's really good. I feel like the first day you had to think about Jeremiah and it's like, ask yourself, are you like a shrub in the desert? Like to whom or to what do you look to feel like you're somebody, right? And I think that just even that first day, I'm like, oh, okay, do I look to something else? Because sometimes, we can think we have it all together and you're like, well, maybe I do look to this for affirmation when it should be looking more internal and looking to God. So it's been a blessing. It's been challenging, if I'm being honest, in the questions as they ask them. It's been really good. So it was just that. It was like I said, I think I need to pick up something different, try a new spiritual practice for the next 30 days. They have to be 40. So here we are. So, yeah. And you can't go wrong with Thurman, right? So
no, never.
You can't go wrong with Thurman, so.
Yeah, that's such a great reminder. I'm thinking now of the poem that we'd spent time meditating on during our event back in February, how good it is to center down and how and just like this moment of like refreshment, like internally and then externally. Like I'm just like smiling now, remembering that and thinking about sacred memory. I think that just in honoring people's time, it's 8:31. I'm going to close us out in a simple prayer. But before that, again, just want to thank you for blessing us. This has been such a sacred time of imagining and strategizing. And I imagine people's brains and synapses are just going boom, 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 boom. So I'll pray us out and then wish people a beautiful Tuesday. So Heavenly God, we come to you tonight in total adoration and gratitude for this time. We thank you for Reverend Danielle and the blessing that she is not only in Texas, but around the world. We thank you, God, that tonight we could talk about putting our faith in the public square, that we could imagine and dream. We ask, Lord, that you would keep afresh our dreams, keep afresh our connections to one another so that we may live out walking humbly before you in doing justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you so much.
Cameras on.
Oh yes. Group pick. Cameras on. Still on Facebook Live. Thank you, Pastor Gabby, for always reminding me that social media is important when I want to be a hermit. Yes, let's all come across. Put your cameras on. We're going to do a little screen grab. If you want to be in this photo, again, we're still alive. We'd love your faces. Wow, everyone looks so beautiful. Look at this. Pastor Gabby, if you want to put your phone down, I'm going to take a screenshot of us and your phone. Yeah, is amazing. Wow. More. Alexis, how is that Whopper?
Get that good car light. Get that good car light.
Oh no, but this has been such a sweet time. And we look forward to spending more of the week with you and celebrating DLE's anniversary.
Yes, thank you so much for this invitation. I love your pastors. They are amazing. And I just love to see all the amazing work that they do. I definitely have them on my prayer list. They are certainly a couple that I lift up in prayer because it's so important to have this work and to be a witness, right, to what God can certainly do through us and to really bring flourishing to, because we need it so much. Like we need people who genuinely love Black people. We need that so much. And so I thank you all for that. You are certainly an amazing model for ministry. And so thank you for the invitation. Of course, I was like, yes, I'll do it. Of course I will. Of course I will. So blessings on your ministry and on your 2nd year anniversary. That is awesome and amazing. So God bless you all. I certainly enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Reverend Ayers. I have a weird thing happening with my computer where it's acting like my phone's ringing and it's not. Blame MacBook. So I'm sorry for the sound in the background. But we just wanted to respond and say how much we love you. Thank you so much for blessing our folks. And y'all, it's our anniversary. So tomorrow we are in person. Pull up if you live in the area or stream with us. God bless you and good night.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.